What's going on, shoe fanatics? Welcome back to the channel. I got a special review for you guys today. Now, normally what I do on the channel, you guys know I review sneakers. Now, talking about sneakers, what I'm going to talk about today is both very relevant and also very irrelevant to the subject matter as a whole. Last Wednesday, I had the pleasure in taking part of an early screening of the movie Air, Courting a Legend. Now, directed by and starring in is Ben Affleck, which also stars Matt Damon, Chris Tucker, Jason Bateman, and the incomparable Viola Davis. So first and foremost, if you have not seen an early screening of this movie, please be advised there are heavy spoilers ahead. Now, as much as I need the likes, the subscriptions, and the early views, if you have not seen this movie, you might want to click off now. Subscribe before you do, though. The movie opens up and centers around Sonny Vaccaro, played by Matt Damon. So before you go into this movie thinking that this movie is about Jordan 1s and sneakers, it's not about that at all. When I say the film centers around Sonny Vaccaro, I mean just that. It centers around Sonny Vaccaro. There's no Tinker Hatfield. There's no multiple colorways of Jordan 1s. There's none of that. The original Jordan 1 shoe itself probably has about 2 minutes of screen time in totality. Now, simultaneously, saying that Michael Jordan is not in the film is not the truth, but saying that Michael Jordan is in the film is also a gross over-exaggeration of his part in this movie. Michael Jordan and the Jordan 1 are not focal points of the movie. They are more plot points to move the movie along. So ultimately, the film opens with Sonny Vaccaro doing what Sonny Vaccaro does. The film does a great job of introducing you to the kind of person that Sonny is in the long run. Opens up, he's actually gambling, he's in the casino, and he's winning a lot. He's doing a whole bunch of winning. Just like that, he loses it all too. What you learn about Sonny is he does not quit even when he takes losses. He gets up and strolls casually right into the office, right into the middle of a business meeting taking place. Now, in that meeting is Rob Strasser, who is played by Jason Bateman. And listen, I love Jason Bateman. Jason Bateman plays every character in all his movies the exact same way, and I absolutely love that guy for that. Now, Rob Strasser, as a real life person, was actually very instrumental in helping to land Jordan, as his film tells you. He then became later on an executive of Adidas before his untimely passing, I believe sometime in 1994. Now, speaking of Adidas, this film takes place in 1984, the summer of the 1984 NBA draft. So in that meeting, as I said before, that this particular Nike executive marketing team is trying to decide who they want to figure and focus their marketing dollars and strategy on. Now, at that time, Nike basketball was dead last in their market share as a whole. They were heavily trailing both Adidas and Converse in the market. And primarily, that's because up to that point, Nike had been known as a running shoe company by name. Now, in that meeting, all those Nike executives were trying to figure out which marquee athlete they were going to sign as their signature athlete. Of course, 1984 being one of the best drafts of all time, you have at that time Akeem Olajuwon, you have Sam Bowie, #2 pick in the NBA draft. At that time, big men were a hot commodity for teams. For the third pick, you have Michael Jordan himself, and so on and so forth. You get the gist. So here's a fun fact for you. In alternate timelines, you actually have Air Stocktons and Air Mel Turpins. But the thing of it is, by this time, most of the top tier athletes will already have intent to sign with other brands. Now, while MJ himself had not actually signed on the dotted line with any other company, he was committed to signing anywhere but Nike. Now, at this time, Sonny Vaccaro cannot quite figure out why Nike basketball has such a hard time signing big name athletes out of college. And enter Howard White, another executive played by Mr. Chris Tucker. And as an aside, I think Chris Tucker did a phenomenal job in this film. Now, I don't know all the criteria for how Oscar nominations are given, but from what I can tell from this little sample size, Chris Tucker, for me, deserves a nod for Best Supporting Actor in a movie. He was just phenomenal in this movie to me. So again, Howard White, who at the time was a field representative for Nike basketball and is now the actual VP of Jordan Brand. So salute to you, Howard White. He actually at that time humorously kind of broke down the differences between Nike, Converse, and Adidas. As we know, Converse has some of the biggest athletes, including Larry Bird, Magic Johnson, and Dr. J. And Adidas themselves just had a chokehold on the culture themselves. They just had like Run DMC and a lot of other rappers. And again, hip hop is huge at that time. Adidas had infiltrated the culture and really made it a staple. Nike kind of got pushed to the side again, being just a running shoe. Now, Vaccaro, being the risk taker that he is, he decides he wants to go all in on Michael Jordan. He wants to take the entire $250,000 budget, which is typically reserved for 3 or maybe 4 athletes, and put all on Michael Jordan himself. Needless to say, Phil Knight, CEO, is less than enthusiastic about putting this entire gambit on Mike Jordan. Not only is Nike basketball on the chopping block for being last in the division, Phil Knight also has to answer to a board of directors since Nike has gone public with their company a few years prior. After butting heads about this, Vaccaro decides to go all in and pursue the Jordans directly. But first, he knows he has to go through David Falk, MJ's longtime agent, to find out where the Jordans are and how to get their attention. Now, the banter between David Falk and Sonny Vaccaro is worth the price of admission alone. I mean, watch this movie, it's hilarious. So one interesting thing to note, Marlon Wayans plays, albeit briefly, a character by the name of George Raveling. Now, George Raveling was actually, I believe, an assistant coach on the 1984 Olympic team, which MJ played in. And George Raveling plays a small but very integral part in recruiting MJ during this process. Now, in that meeting with Raveling, Vaccaro learns the best way to get to MJ and the family. He also tells Vaccaro a very interesting story, which will resonate with Vaccaro and play a part later on in the film. So with that information, one thing leads to another, and Vaccaro heads to Wilmington, North Carolina, home of the Jordans. And in particular, he meets with the matriarch of the family, Dolores Jordan, played by, once again, the incomparable Viola Davis, which we'll talk more about a little bit later on. Now, the danger here is that he goes to that house without a formal deal in place. Again, he's not backed by Phil Knight at this time. He has no money in his budget to offer him. All he has is basically, his word and his bond that he's going to do the right thing by MJ. He ends up striking what is pretty much a handshake deal with Dolores, and he also gives her a few tidbits, a few insights about how he thinks, or should I say, how he knows the meetings with Adidas and Converse are going to go once MJ and his family sit down with those two companies respectively. He also asks Mrs. Jordan for just one small favor. He asks that if the meetings go with Converse and Adidas the way he predicts they will, that the Jordans will ultimately meet with Nike at the end of the whole little tour run. Now, at this point, more hilarity ensues because David Falk finds out that Sonny Vaccaro circumvented him. He went around his back and got the meeting with the Jordans, and hilarity, just hilarity. I mean, come back to Nike headquarters in Oregon, and Phil Knight he's beyond upset. Again, Sonny Vaccaro was doing this all behind everybody's back. But again, this is the way that Vaccaro operates. He's an all into the table kind of guy. Phil Knight is distraught once more because, again, he doesn't have the capital for the car, the money, or board of director approval. So he's kind of got his hands tied in a bunch. So flash forward, the meetings with Converse and Adidas turned out just the way Sonny Vaccaro said they would. And Dolores Jordan and the Jordan family decide to meet with Nike after all. And begrudgingly, David Falk lets Vaccaro know the Jordans are coming. And now the real work starts. So with that information in tow, Vaccaro and Strassman go down to the basement where we finally meet the late, great Peter Moore himself, designer at Nike headquarters. Now, at this point, if you are a sneakerhead, there's a few things to geek out about down here. There's a couple of prototypes as well as some models of the Cortez and the Tailwinds. Nothing that's really like mind-blowing today, but it does give you insight to the genesis of Nike as a whole. Also, this part with Peter Moore is really brilliant. It gives you the insight into the mind of how designers think. There's also a couple of cool little Easter eggs down here, including blueprints for what looks like what would turn out to be the Nike Airship. This could be a continuity error. I'm not sure if Peter Moore had already started designing the shoe prior to Jordan's commitment or afterwards, but there's a few little blueprints that have something that looks similar to this before he gets to start work on the Air Jordan 1. Peter Moore was well aware of the design limitations that the NBA had for its players, and the original design of the shoe that he initially put out was to conform to those standards. Vaccaro thought that it needed more. It needed a more pop of red. It's needed to punch it up a little bit. And thus we got this particular shoe. As an example, for you non-sneakerheads out there who may be watching this video, this is the actual shape of the 1985 Air Jordan that you see in the film. So if you take this shape and mix it with this colorway, this is how you get the original 1985 Air Jordan 1 as seen in the film. So finally, we get a glimpse of the Air Jordan 1 in its high OG 85 version in the Chicago colorway. And yes, I did wear this to the viewing, so whatever. It was also at that point, apparently, that we knew that if MJ wore those shoes, he would be fined. And Vaccaro and Strassman decided to go ahead and pay those fines without Phil Knight knowing. But the great part of it is that they would turn into a marketing tool. And that's what really made Nike special above all else.
On September 15th, Nike created a revolutionary new basketball shoe. On October 18th, the NBA threw them out of the game. Fortunately, the NBA can't stop you from wearing them. Air Jordans from Nike.
So in the meanwhile, Phil Knight is wrestling with what to do with this information. He knows he has the Jordans coming to his place. He knows that a whole campaign is being built around MJ, and he still has not gotten approval from the board to both spend the money and do this whole wild, wacky thing that they're doing right now. He finally comes to terms with the decision, reminding himself that this is how Nike came to be as a company as a whole, just going for it and just putting all your eggs in one basket and trying to make it work. Flash forward to that Monday, and the entire team is ready to put on a show for the Jordans. Most everyone that you have seen up to that point is now in a meeting. The Jordans, Vaccaro, White, Moore, Strassman, and I guess that's everybody. Everybody's at the meeting ready to go all in to pitch Michael Jordan. But let's just say that Michael Jordan was less than enthusiastic about being there. This is where you also finally see Michael Jordan. I mean, you see the back of his head and the side of his face for maybe 2 minutes at a time or something. I mean, it's ridiculous. As mentioned, Michael Jordan is less than enthusiastic about the shoe, about the marketing presentation. And at this point, Vaccaro decides to really bet the whole house. And he throws away the presentation and he goes all in on giving this impassioned speech off the cuff to MJ. The same kind of thing that Marlon Wayne's character, George Raveling, told him about in their little meeting. Eventually, the meeting adjourns and the Jordans fly back to North Carolina to mull over their decision. A couple of days go by, and Vaccaro's going crazy. The anticipation is killing him. Howard White calls him, gives him a little bit of news, just saying that Adidas did match the offer sheet presented to the Jordans. And at this point, Vaccaro's still trying to hold out hope that Jordan will sign with them in the long run. A couple more days go by, and Dolores Jordan gives them some good news that MJ will sign with Nike. But there's a catch. The film really gives you a sense that Dolores Jordan is all about family. She's about legacy and a lasting legacy, especially knowing and believing in who her son will ultimately become. The caveat is that Dolores Jordan wants Mike to get revenue sharing, a piece of the pie of every product that bears his name. At that time, unprecedented for athletes of all brands. So they say if you're trying to communicate with a person, if you ask for someone for an impossibility, it's the same as saying no. It's akin to saying it's never going to happen. And that's what Vaccaro thought. But eventually he went ahead and took the deal to Knight, who at that point, again, reminded himself what made Nike so great. And he uttered two of my favorite words in the whole film. Knight approves the deal, and as they say, the rest is history. Just like that, Michael Jeffrey Jordan is now a Nike athlete. And that's pretty much it. I thought overall the film was incredibly engaging. It was very humorous at parts, had a lot of levity to it. It managed to not take itself so seriously, but also was very serious and endearing to the parts where it needed to be. The writing and acting, I think, was brilliant, especially, again, Chris Tucker, Viola Davis, and Matt Damon for carrying the film. As a movie watcher, sometimes I hate when scenes are too long or they're too short and don't really convey the message they are. For example, I had the pleasure of watching John Wick, and it was almost too much action in John Wick 4. But this one actually was very succinct to the point, and it moved the story along with a proper pace and told a good story at the same time. So for some more fun facts, when Ben Affleck actually made the film, he had to sit down with Michael Jordan to get his blessing first. And as I mentioned earlier, there were only 2 or 3 things that MJ really wanted to focus on. He wanted to make sure that both George Raveling and Howard White were in the film. He felt both of them were very instrumental to his time and decision while being there at Nike. And the other thing was he insisted that Viola Davis play his mother in the film. I mean, how's that for a request? The movie was really about courting a legend. It was really an underdog story, which is not what you would expect from a company like Nike, which is the big behemoth we know it to be today. So if you're a fan of trying to see how big business works, how some of your favorite stories come about, how just really a left turn or a right turn can make things a difference, Air is the type of movie for you. I was afraid about spoiling the movie, but as my homies has said, how can you spoil something that's documented history? It makes sense to me. That's my thoughts and review on Air, Courting a Legend, produced and distributed by Amazon and Warner Brothers Films. I think Air comes out April 5th to your local theater. So if this is a movie that you're kind of interested in, go check it out. Thank you all for sitting here and watching this spoiler-filled review. I hope it encourages you to watch the film for yourself. And after all that being said, I have been Jay Shoe Fanatic, and I'm out of here, man. Peace. Let's go. Oh, the original cut. There it absolutely is. I might like it better than the 2020 version.